wellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
You're listening to A Quirky Journey, the Healthy Family Podcast with your hosts Jo Whitton and Fuad Kassab. Hello everyone, how are you all going today? Okay, so I'm going to go on to the podcast, but I just want to explain a little bit about Rhiannon. So Rhiannon Crisp is an occupational therapist and she's a passionate autism advocate. She thinks outside the diagnostic box and she sees every child as an individual with unlimited potential. Rhiannon's dedicated to offering parents a smorgasbord of ideas and interventions as she understands that there is not a one-size-fits-all approach to the complexities of autism. And this is where integrative doctors come in. It's something that they're very good at too, looking for the right treatments for each individual. So Rhiannon is the host of Home Base Hope, which is a fortnightly podcast dedicated to empowering parents of kids on the spectrum, giving them the tools that they need to make life easier, to help their children to thrive and to do the best they can for their children. She's also hosting Australia's largest free and online autism event in April, and it's called the Autism Summit. So if you have any interest in helping kids with autism, or you have children on the spectrum and you want to know more about this, you can look at the link in the show notes and you'll find that there. We had a really good chat and Rhiannon's very balanced. She's really a lovely, caring person who just wants to help families with kids on the spectrum. And she feels like in our society, we kind of need to unlearn a lot of what we used to think about autism. You know how it is where science will work out new things, but popular media and social media and popular ideas take a while to catch up to science sometimes, because things get ingrained. It becomes a habit to think a certain way and we think, no, that can't be wrong. And then we find out later it actually was. So there's some things that she wants to explain about autism and about how the behaviours are defined and why do we need to be looking beyond the behaviours, and things that we need to look at like nutrition and things that parents can do in the home to support the health and development of their child. Things like fussy eaters, how to work with them. So she's got some really great ideas and I hope you'll really get a lot out of this podcast. Thank you all for listening. And I hope to have Fuad back on the show again soon. He's having a break from social media and just having some time out, so he'll be back eventually. But thank you so much for being here, and we'll move on to the podcast. Welcome to Rhiannon. How are you?
Hey, Jo. How are you going?
Good. So nice to have you on the podcast. You've got your own podcast.
Yes, I do. Home Base Hope, all about autism.
Yes.
I've been doing that for just a little bit over a year now. So,
awesome. Yeah. I haven't managed to listen yet. You know what it's like. I do want to, but I'm going to pick your brains today anyway. And for those of you who've not listened to Home Base, is it Home Base for Hope? No,
it's just Home Base Hope. So it's Home Base is one word and Hope is
okay. We are interested to hear about the work that you do with autistic children and parents of kids on the spectrum. So you're an occupational therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And can you just tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been an OT now for just over 10 years, and for the majority of my career I've been working with kids, and really in particular kids on the spectrum. So it really started back when I was living in Victoria and I started work at a special development school, and I had absolutely no idea about autism. I really didn't know what it was. I was really thrown into the deep end. But I became really fascinated and interested in how these kids' brains work and what's going on for them. And then I actually moved to New South Wales and did some more work with kids, and my caseload was predominantly kids on the spectrum. But it wasn't until I moved to the Northern Territory and I was living in Katherine. And as you know, it is very isolated. It's really, really remote. Yeah. And I started working with a little 3-year-old boy, and he came from a non-English speaking background. He was just diagnosed as being on the spectrum, and his parents were really lost as to what to do. They felt really isolated. They had no other services helping them. I was the only health professional in the area who was helping them with this. And to be honest, even though I had worked with so many different kids before and so many different kids with a range of abilities and challenges, this was the first time I really felt isolated myself because I didn't have that team approach and there was no one else around. And, you know, this little boy, he was 3, as I said. He was nonverbal, so he wasn't talking. He had a very restricted diet, so mum was having to almost force feed him food because he had absolutely no interest in it. He had repetitive behaviours all day long. He would be spinning constantly in circles, and if he wasn't spinning, he would be rocking on the chair back and forth really rhythmically, just getting that deep proprioceptive input into his back, and it was really calming for him. But he couldn't play. Like, he had no idea of the concept of play. He would just pick up a toy car and bang it on the ground or throw it away. And he didn't recognise mum as mum. He didn't know that was his mum. He wouldn't respond to his name. So all these little things, and these are very common for kids on the spectrum. Parents will be relating to a lot of these things. But I just knew in my heart that I needed to learn more about autism. I just became so curious and hungry to learn more and understand what is actually going on. I wanted to delve into the science behind autism. And I just really wanted to help this family. So I actually flew down to the Gold Coast and I did the GAPS practitioner training course. Because I'm really interested in health and well-being, and it's something that I'm personally interested in. And I just knew that nutrition is foundational for anyone's health, particularly kids who have challenges. And when I was just up late nights researching, and I just started to realise there are so many different disciplines working with kids, and they're all doing things differently. We have so many different people and professionals with different ideas and perspectives and angles at how they're looking at autism and how they're working with these kids. And just working with this family really served as rocket fuel for my autism mission. And that's when I just wanted to get more information out there in terms of what I have been learning about. So I started the podcast, Home Base Hope Podcast, which is a fortnightly podcast where I'm interviewing really amazing professionals who are delving into the science. I'm talking to autistic people who can talk about their lived experience. I'm talking to parents who have undergone just extraordinary experiences and have so much insight to share. And that, I suppose, just really was fuel for me to help more families, particularly when I know there are so many families who are lost and isolated and don't know what's going on.
Yeah. So there's so many different, I guess it's kind of like when I found out my son Isaac had OCD, I had always thought OCD was a certain thing. I thought it was being scared of germs, washing your hands all the time. That's what I thought it was. And then there was so much more to it. And it's different. It sort of varies for different children. So I'm sure that autism is the same way, that you'd see different things in different kids. Can you explain what it actually is and, what's the range of things that we're seeing with autistic children?
Yeah. So it's interesting because the more I actually learned about autism, the more I realised I actually had to unlearn what I'd learned. And I had to be really open-minded and let go of some of my really deeply ingrained belief systems around autism. And I suppose what's important to understand when we're looking at autism is that, you know, how we understood it 50, 60, 70 years ago is really different to how we understand it today. So our understanding has actually changed significantly. And there's really been no consistency. It's hard because it is this subjective diagnosis. It's not like diagnosing a stroke where there are these biological markers. You don't get that with autism. So, I mean, in the 50s, we understood autism to be this psychological disorder where it was blamed on parents who were cold to their kids, and mums, they were given the name refrigerator mother. So
that's awful.
And of course we know this isn't the case. Like, we know that's not what autism is, but back in the day, that's how we understood it. With the information that we had, that's what we thought caused these behaviours in the kids on the spectrum. And then, you know, look, jump to the 80s, we started to learn more about it, and it was added to the Diagnostic Manual of Mental Disorders. And we started to understand it was based on speech delay and behaviours. In the 90s, Asperger's was added to the criteria. But interestingly, you know, when the next diagnostic manual came out, it was no longer there. So Asperger's doesn't exist anymore.
It's all
it's that we don't use that term anymore because it's not in the diagnostic manual. So it's everyone falls under autism spectrum disorder.
Right.
And
it's just as you say, a spectrum. It's So Asperger's was sort of known as the quote unquote high functioning autism. Yes.
So I suppose my point is that our understanding has just changed so much, and we're continuing to change this criteria of what we understand autism to be. So we can't just place kids in this diagnostic box and say they have autism, so based on this, these are the interventions we need to give them or we need to provide. Because we really don't know what it is. And if we keep really closed-minded and just providing interventions based on this diagnosis or the criteria as it is now, then we could be really missing a lot of valuable interventions that aren't quote unquote autism specific, like nutrition and you know, those sorts of things that are really helpful for any child, but particularly for kids who are having challenges.
So one part of unlearning what we used to think about autism is the whole genetic subject. Can you just explain that to us?
Sure. So we used to understand autism to be this purely hardwired genetic condition. So it's something that you're born with and you have to live with for the rest of your life. It's like this life sentence. It's a really hopeless diagnosis, and it is what it is, basically. But what we're starting to understand more and more is that autism is actually an epigenetic condition, which means that epigenetics means that there's environmental factors that are imposed on top of our genes, which actually have that ability to turn our genes on and off. And your audience probably know a little bit about epigenetics. But basically this means that a child can be born with the genes that makes them more vulnerable to autism. Yeah. But lifestyle factors can actually determine whether these genes become activated or not.
Yes.
So when we're looking at epigenetics, we're looking at things that, you know, are like the diet, chemicals in and around the home and what chemicals kids are exposed to, and even pregnant women, stress, pollution, infection, EMF exposure, a sedentary lifestyle even. You know, these are things that can have a really profound influence on gene expression. So, of course, we understand that genes are associated with autism, and what we know is that there's not one autism gene. Currently, we understand that there are hundreds of genes that are associated with autism.
Okay.
But the problem with thinking that it's purely a genetic condition is that we start to believe that there's nothing that we can do, you know, because if it is hardwired, then it is what it is, you know, and all we can do is just accommodate the symptoms. And often, parents will turn their back to the possibilities of lifestyle as a serious intervention. And there's a lot more that we can do than just accommodate the symptoms. So yes, genes are associated with autism, but we know environmental factors do play a major role. It's coming back to this, there's not this one size fits all approach to autism. There's not a cookie cutter approach. We've got to be looking at the habits and the routines and the lifestyle that a child lives, and how we can just make small changes to that to help with them.
I've noticed parents looking at this from two different directions. You'll get some parents say, they sort of get defensive and say, now you're saying that it's my fault my child's like this because I haven't done enough to have a great environment for them. And then others will say, oh my goodness, now I have so much hope because I know I can start working on things that will change them and help them to grow and develop and become, have less symptoms because I can work on their environment. So, can you just give a little bit of encouragement to parents out there with kids on the spectrum?
And I see that too, Jo, all the time. But the thing is, parents, anyone, we don't know what we don't know. And a lot of
there's a lot of their environment that we can't control because it's our society, it's our world.
Exactly. Our world is very different to how it was 50, 60, 70 years ago. So when we go back, when we start to understand that too, we can start to realize that, autism is this epigenetic condition because our world has changed so much over this time span. But it is really an empowering model to look at because it means that parents can make a difference. It means you can most certainly start to make changes. These are factors that are somewhat within your control. So it is really empowering for parents to start looking at the little changes that they can make a really significant difference to their child's life.
Yeah, that's good. It reminds me of what Elise, who we work with quite closely, she always says, genetics loads the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger.
Absolutely. And it's that tipping point. Some kids, maybe it is just genes and it was going to be that way. For some kids, it might be that there is this tipping point and there is something that maybe tips them over the edge. I don't know. And you know what? Like I said, we are still learning so much more about autism and
about genetics.
And epigenetics. Like that's the exciting thing isn't it? Our environment. And we're continuing to learn more. But I think at the end of the day, I think what's important to take home is that you can make a difference from home. You can be doing little things at home that can help your child. So surround yourself with other parents who are like-minded. Find your tribe. Don't get caught up in the negativity. Work out what works for you and your family. It's different for everyone. Just find the right fit for you. And
don't get overwhelmed with all the changes that you suddenly realise that you could be making. You've got to start with one thing and just work on it slowly. And I'm sure that's how you help families. Little changes.
Little changes every day, working on one thing. Yeah. And parents, for them to treat yourself kindly. There is so much to learn.
It's so overwhelming.
It is. To say the least. And that's why I started my podcast, is because I really just wanted to show parents that there is so much information out there and you've got to pick and choose. And I interview people who are from, the neurodiversity movement, who are really, they're autistic and they're proud. They're proud to be autistic.
It's great.
And they have so many insights, and I find what they have to say so much value. Absolutely. It's just incredible. I love what the biomedical people are doing. I love, nutrition and how they're helping the body and the cells. I think the therapists are doing an amazing job. So looking at the habits and the learnt behaviors, and also the people who are in this neurodiversity movement. We've got all these different camps in the autism community, and it's actually really divided. And what I'm trying to do and what I'm really passionate about is bringing the community together and saying, hey, we all are looking at the same complex thing from a different angle. Yeah. Let's work together on this because we all have something to offer and to something of value.
I was listening to a podcast the other day by Dr. Caroline Leaf, and she was talking about the old theory of left brain, right brain, and how that's been proven that we don't just predominantly think with one side of the brain. And she was saying how, for instance, you look at a maths problem and one side of the brain reads it like 2 + 2 = 4. And the other side of the brain looks at it as 4 = 2 groups of 2. And neither is wrong, and both work together to give you an understanding of the problem. And that's what we should be doing in the medical community. Everyone's looking at it from a different angle. We all look at it together then, and we can see it properly. So I just thought, yeah, that's exactly what we should be doing.
That's a good analogy. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, that's really good. So how do they define autism now? Like if they're diagnosing a child, what are the things that define an autistic child?
So, well, if we look at the criteria, and again, this is sort of just that criteria, so we can sort of say, at the moment, this is how we're understanding it.
Yeah.
It's based on 2 areas of deficits. And, I don't particularly like to use that word deficits, but it's social communication deficits. So, like I said, if they're nonverbal or they don't understand gestures or facial expressions, they might not show an interest in making friends. And the second one is restricted or repetitive behaviours. So like I said, with the little boy that I was working with, he would just spin endlessly in circles, or he'd rock. Kids might walk on their toes and just be constantly toe walking. They might hand flap. So these different repetitive movements that we might see. And they also tend to have really intense interests.
Yeah.
But how I like to see it is that, autism is behaviourally defined, but, it is subjective. So there is no biological testing. You can't go in and get a DNA test. You can't go in and get a blood test or a brain scan or anything like that. So I'll have families who will come to me who will have their child assessed, and, parents are becoming more curious. They'll go to 2 different paediatricians to get a second opinion. And one paediatrician might diagnose them with autism, and the next might diagnose them with ADHD or no diagnosis. So it can be difficult and challenging. It is currently understood to be this neurodevelopmental condition. So neuro meaning brain, and developmental meaning that it starts at some time in early childhood. But we do, like all your listeners would know, we need to look just beyond the brain, because the brain is connected to the rest of the body.
That's right.
And autism is very much a whole body condition. It's not just a condition of the brain, because we will see that kids on the spectrum have more than just behavioural challenges. We'll often see them with gastrointestinal problems. We'll see them with poor immune system. They take a lot longer to recover from any setback. They'll have challenges with sleeping and sensory processing. And what we tend to do is treat these as, or a lot of the times we'll treat them as, and coincidental symptoms. It's a coincidence that they have this, and we're not looking at the whole picture. And we need to look at the whole child and not just isolate these things. It's really looking at the whole child and starting to understand that the brain and the body are connected, understanding that it's when the brain and the body is going under too much stress, it's going to result in these neurological, biological, social, emotional challenges that we see. Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. And, you know, for those parents out there that are, maybe they've had those conflicting diagnoses and they're trying to figure out what to do, it's encouraging to talk to someone like you who can say, hey, all children will benefit from looking after all these areas, like you say, the whole child approach. So your nutrition, you know, the exercise, all the things that I'm sure that you work on with your children that you work with. What's some things that you put into place to support these children with their families?
Well, like you said, looking beyond the behaviour. So, like in terms of nutrition, I could have kids coming to see me to work on their behaviours, for example. So they're interrupting in class, they can't sit still, they're fidgety, they're always angry, you know, whatever the behaviour is that we're seeing. And I can work on these behaviours until the cows come home. Yeah. But unless we look at their nutrition and notice that they're having really processed food in their diet, you know, it could be cordial or it could be packets of chips and additives and preservatives that are setting them off.
Cereal.
Yeah, absolutely. Like everyday things that people, we just consider the norm.
Yeah, in our society.
Yeah. I mean, no amount of therapy is going to help a child who is feeding that problem.
Yeah.
And so I really think it's about empowering parents to understand that there isn't this one-size-fits-all approach to the complexities of autism. There's not one single thing that's going to help your child. It's a combination of everything. It's really looking at nutrition. So I look at it from a really basic point of view. I find that most of the parents I work with, you know, we're nowhere near gaps. It's just looking at simple replacements. What can we add to the diet and what can we remove?
Yep.
And, you know, that is going to set the foundation. And a lot of the times parents will start to notice differences just with small changes in nutrition and diet. I mean, nature play, looking at getting outside more. We are so glued to our technology and our screens, and obviously that's going to cause behavioural issues. A lot of kids have these techno tantrums when you want to turn it off, or, you know, we've got to get to school.
Do you find that a lot of parents that are overwhelmed with their children's behaviours and, you know, with special needs children will tend to rely on the technology a lot? I mean, I totally understand that that's sort of because they're not coping. Well, it can become...
Sorry. No, you're right. It can become a really easy babysitter. And for parents who are already stressed, it is really easy. And I totally understand that. Yeah. And it's working with the parents to say, okay, let's set up some boundaries and some rules around this. How can we, you know, make something more exciting outside? How can we get them outside? Yeah. What do they love? What are their interests? What motivates them?
Because I had one mother tell me that the doctor actually said to her when her child was diagnosed, she said, well, what can I do? And he said, buy a big flat screen TV. And that's what he told her. It's like, no.
I know. And
that's so much else that you can do. I guess that's that feeling.
I mean, if that's their one bit of advice.
I know. There's just so much good advice that you could give there, but they need someone like you.
And you know what? It's interesting actually you said that, because in America, doctors are literally writing out prescriptions saying play outdoors.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, this was like a few years ago, like maybe 10 years ago, but still.
Yeah, exactly. So we're really starting to rethink what intervention approaches are going to work. And do you know what, Jo? It's different for every child. So it really needs to be individual, just like nutrition, anything. It really needs to be individual to that person. So, you know, looking at sleep is a massive one. This is when the body obviously does all its healing and repairing. So we've got to look at the quality and the quantity of the sleep that the child's getting. And usually kids on the spectrum they're really poor sleepers. So this is an area that we need to look at. And it's really looking at daily habits. What are the rituals and the routines? So I, as an OT, I prefer to be mobile. So I will actually go into clients' homes and actually assess what's going on there. You know, it is so, it's invaluable. The richness of information that I get from a home visit is just, you can't get it from sitting in a clinic where a child has never been before and you're just filling out a questionnaire. I get to see what's in the cupboard, you know, what is actually in the pantry. I get to see you know, parents who are cleaning their floors with bleach because they're really house proud and don't know, you know, that this could be triggering certain things and behaviours. I get to see how chaotic the morning routine might be and how much stress and overload the family is in the morning and how to change this. And little things like looking at the bedroom and looking at the bedroom environment, looking at where the Wi-Fi is, how can we make the bedroom more suitable and more just better for sleep. You know, is there a light shining in and they're really sensitive to light and they can't sleep because it's just shining in their eyes of a nighttime. But, you know, if they can't articulate things, they can't tell you that the seam on their pajamas is annoying them, or they can't tell you that they just need that deep pressure. You know, a lot of kids might need like weighted blankets or big bear hugs, or they might need music to put them to sleep. So looking at sensory aspects as well is really important. But there is just so much parents can be doing at home. And I think a lot of the time parents feel really passive in the intervention process. So they'll take them to therapy and they're always, you know, they've got so many after hours appointments running them to here and there. But what's really important, and that's more important than any therapy, is to get the habits and the rituals at home right first. Yeah, that's home is where the magic happens.
We were talking a couple of weeks ago to Sharon from the Functional Family. I don't know if you've seen her online, but she has a program for parents of kids with ADHD, anxiety, that kind of thing. And that was her main point in the podcast, was work on your schedules and routines, because that helps them so much to be able to know what's happening next and to have that, to be able to know that everything's, I don't know, in order maybe. So is that pretty much similar with autistic children?
Yeah, so what's interesting is that, we have been led to believe that routine and structure is what kids need, and it does. It helps them function really well. But we've got to understand that we live in a chaotic world. It is hectic. It's busy. It's rushed. We're always just trying to keep up. And for kids on the spectrum, if we keep it so routine and so structured that for some reason something doesn't go according to plan, that can be the end of the world.
Right, yeah. I think what she was saying was, like, for instance, when she goes out, she'll draw a picture with a circle and have, like, home to shop to petrol station with the arrows, and then they can sort of see where they're going, and things like that, just so that they get a visual. I don't know, it would probably be different for ADHD anyway, but
it's very similar. It's very similar. So like what I was saying, like kids are put in these diagnostic boxes,
right?
And we've just got to look at the child and understand, you know, what is it that they need? Because for some kids, they do like that structure. And
so I have one that definitely needs that. He loses it when he doesn't know what's happening that morning. He's 19 and he'll just be lost. He'll just wander around the house if he doesn't have a list or at least talk him through, okay, what's happening today, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, he's still like that now.
Yeah, and that's good. And look, we all do that. We all need our calendar. We all rely on our diary. So that is really important, and that does help us get us through the day. Otherwise, we would be lost. But the importance is just ensuring that if things don't go plan, if there's someone that is highly anxious or, you know, it's going to rattle them if there's a substitute teacher that day, or something doesn't go according to plan, or their favorite breakfast isn't out, and whatever it is, we need to ensure that we can help them cope with that uncertainty.
And so how do you start to build that resilience into them?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was talking to Dr. James Best, who is a GP and also a dad to a teenager on the spectrum. And he actually took his son on a 6-month trip to Africa to actually throw him into chaos and uncertainty. And
sounds like what I just did with my 2 eldest, including the one that I just talked about.
Yeah. And I mean, it's incredible because you have to learn to be resilient and to cope and to
every day
understand. Yeah, there's no predictability. And he's saying that this is really important for the brain to learn to cope, and really, really good for the brain. So although we do encourage that routine and structure, try and push it a little bit. Try and just push it a little bit to see how they cope. And obviously we need to help them cope because if they can't self-regulate for themselves, we need to give them the tools and the strategies to help them to do that. But at the end of the day, when they get out into the real world, we want to help them to be independent. And when life does throw them a curveball, or when something doesn't go according to plan, they have the skills, they have the tools in their toolbox to be able to cope with that.
Yeah. And as they get older, you definitely have to pull back from organising their day. And don't worry, I don't organise my 19-year-old's day. But he's just the type of kid that always asks what's happening today, you know. And I'm trying to, he's more ADHD than anything, but he's very, it's just interesting seeing how, you know, as they grow up, because, you know, we often talk about children on the spectrum when they're young, or children with ADHD, but as they grow up, how does that transition into them being able to, like you say, cope with everyday life and be more independent? And that's scary for parents, you know, trying to get them ready for that. So have you got any tips for parents with older kids and as they're growing up, how to teach them more independence? Little practical things.
Well, one of the amazing things that I've sort of learned on this whole autism journey that I've been on the last few years is a lot of parents really benefit from learning from autistic adults. So finding autistic mentors that you can, you know, there's so many people on Facebook and Instagram and just social media these days. I highly recommend Alison Davies. She is a neurologic music therapist. She's on the Autism Summit.
I know Alison.
She's incredible.
Lovely.
She is.
And she does the music therapy. Yeah.
Yes.
Seen her for a while. So she's going to be on your summit.
Yes.
Okay. Which you haven't told us about yet.
We can dive into that.
Yes.
But also Christy Forbes, she is so articulate. She is really incredible. And, you know, there is this movement, the neurodiversity movement, basically, where autistic people and people from, you know, neurodivergent backgrounds are really advocating for a strengths-based model and looking at the ability and focusing on the ability, not the disability.
Yeah, great.
And I think this is really important for developing that self-esteem and the confidence, because you don't want kids growing up into adults who are unsure of themselves, who don't know who they are. I think it's really important. So looking at adults and learning how they are coping and learning from them, because that's who I learn from as well. You know, we can have all the textbooks in the world.
Yeah.
But that's not going to, you know, the lived experience is so valuable. It's just immeasurable.
When you read other people's stories or hear them speak, it can really help things to click a lot more than just reading text, for sure. I'm a story person. I want to hear it in real life. How does this look? What does this look like in real life?
Absolutely. So both Alison Davies and Christy Forbes are in the Autism Summit.
Awesome. So tell us about the Autism Summit.
Yes. So basically, I have rounded up 20 incredible speakers who are going to be talking about a whole range of different topics. We have people on the spectrum, we have parents, and also trailblazers in the industry. So basically, I'll do about a 45-minute interview with each person, covering a specific topic. So it's ranging from anything from anxiety, meltdowns and behaviours. I talk to different therapists, so occupational therapists, speech pathologists, psychologists, including Professor Tony Atwood, who is incredible, looking at different frameworks. So I am all about providing this smorgasbord of ideas and interventions. I don't subscribe to one type of therapy or one type of approach. I honestly think in order to look at the whole child, we need to look at different ideas and different interventions and work out what the right fit is for your child. Yeah. Because, you know, you can have two kids on the spectrum and they are absolute polar opposites. They don't have any similarities whatsoever. And you kind of think, how can this be, you know? Yeah. It's autism. It's the same diagnosis. So it comes back to working out what works for your child. And the summit is all about offering parents and teachers and professionals who want to learn more about different intervention approaches, including like diet and nutrition is also covered. So I speak to Kirsty Worth all about gut health, and also speaking to Sue Denge, who is the author of Fed Up. So looking at salicylates and amines and different things like that.
They come into it.
Yeah, and it's really about just gathering the autism community together despite the different approaches that people take. And, just showcasing this to parents so they can pick and choose what's going to fit in with their family.
Right. Well, that's really good. And when does it begin?
Yes, so it's free and online, so anyone can access it if you've got access to a computer or an iPhone or some sort of digital device.
Which pretty much does.
Well, if you're listening to this podcast, you'll be able to access it.
That's right.
It's free and it starts on the 1st of April and it runs till the 5th of April. So there'll be 4 speakers speaking each day. It's live streaming, so you sort of have to watch it at the time that it comes on. But the speakers will, because it's pre-recorded, because it's a massive mission, this coordinating it all. But they will come on a few times throughout the day. So if you don't get to watch them in the morning, they'll come on again later at night. So it gives you that opportunity. But if parents want the convenience of watching it when suits them, they can get lifetime access to the summit. So basically that means they can, watch it at whatever time they like, whenever they like. They can pause it, rewind it.
Like a recording,
can take notes. And they will also get access to NDIS videos. So that's the National Disability Insurance funding that people get. There's a lot of confusion around the funding, and parents want to make sure that they get the funding that their child requires. So
it's expensive to have all the specialists, isn't it? So you really need that.
I had a chat to an NDIS manager who gives us a lot of tips and just gems on how to
that's great.
Access it. Yeah.
Sounds like something that is really, really helpful. Good on you for doing that.
No, it's been heaps of fun. And honestly, the lineup of people who are coming on are incredible. It's amazing.
Oh, that's exciting. Well, we'll put the link to that in the show notes, definitely.
It's just autismsummit.com.au.
Okay, easy. All right. And so they just need to sign up before the 1st of April.
Yeah, if you their email address, you'll get the updates. Yep.
And will it be available to buy later on in case anyone missed this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so if you're listening to this sometime in the future, just again, autismsummit.com.au and you can purchase the lifetime access.
Okay, thanks. Before we finish up, do you have, I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but I hate it when people do this to me. Can you think of I don't know, just an encouraging story of maybe one of your clients, without names and flattening out details, obviously, but that you've seen your way of doing things with all the different therapies and looking at the whole child? Can you think of a story where you've really seen amazing changes?
Yeah, I think what happens is that with so many of the kids that I see, it is about these small changes. It's about making small changes to everyday life. And that's what we do as OTs. Yeah. We, and a lot of people don't even know what OT actually is.
Oh, maybe you should explain that.
As OTs, we look at what occupies a child's day. So when we talk about occupation actually refers to anything that occupies your time. So that could be, for a child, it could be toileting, it could be making friends, it could be handwriting, it could be, anything, and eating, anything, absolutely anything, basically. So we want to help them with incorporating meaningful activities into their day-to-day life, and also increasing their independence. Yeah. And so with all the kids that I've worked with, like, I've honestly, you see little changes, and I think it's not until you step back and you see the bigger picture that you go, wow, so much has changed. So if I go back to the little boy that I was talking about at the start of this podcast, he has, he's no longer consistently doing these repetitive behaviors of spinning and rocking. He's able to play. He can, he will call mum over and he'll say, mum, come over here, and invite her into the play.
Oh, that's great.
He will build blocks and towers and use a car how it's intended. So he'll zoom that around the racetrack. He's starting to make friends at his childcare where he's going, his preschool. And it really is just measuring the quality of life, and it's helping that child reach their full potential. It's not measuring it based on
other children.
No, because when we do that, I think parents get focused on...
We have a tendency to do that, don't we?
Yeah, we do. And we really need to reassess our expectations and say, just because Tommy, who's also 4 years old, is doing X, Y, Z, you can't expect your child to do that. If they haven't, you can't leapfrog stages. So you can't go from where your child is now and get them up to Tommy. You've got to go through all those developmental things, get the brain wiring how it should, wiring and strengthening all those neural connections. And then they will start to catch up, but don't try and leapfrog these developmental stages that they need to go through. They need to experience. They need to work it out for themselves. What we need to do is to be able to provide them with the tools and the strategies. And like I said, at home, if you can get your routines and your rituals at home, that is one of the most important things. And for this little kid too, sensory processing. So he wouldn't respond to his name. So it's looking at, he was under responsive to a lot of information. So he was in his own world. He would just sort of walk around and not take in information. You almost need to yell in his face or have really bright lights for him to notice things that other kids would notice really immediately. But he wasn't detecting it. But you also have most kids on the spectrum actually over-respond to sensory input. So a little bit of sensory input and it's too much. Oh my gosh, that's what's causing the meltdown. So again, just looking at your child, I suppose my take home would be is to look beyond the behaviours. Behaviour is just the tip of the iceberg. We need to look at what's actually going on underneath. Why are they acting this way? Why are we seeing these behaviors? What's triggering it? And what's contributing to it? And like I said, looking at nutrition, sleep, how they're processing sensory information, incorporating more movement into the day, all these different things are going to just set up that foundation.
Stack the deck as much as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
That's really good. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And guys, make sure you hop over and listen to Rhiannon's podcast, Home Base Hope. We'll put the link in the show notes. And have a listen to the summit if you can get onto that. That sounds like it's going to be really, really interesting. It was really good to talk to you, Rhiannon. Lovely to meet you.
Thanks so much, Jay.
Thank you so much. And guys, we'll be back in a fortnight with another interview. So please stick around and we'll see you all soon.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/The Wellness Couch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.